Welcome to this lesson on dividing with fractions. Today we're going to talk about how to divide with fractions and how to divide with mixed numbers. So we're going to have a couple of different variations here where we're dividing whole numbers and fractions, whole numbers and mixed numbers and fractions, fractions and fractions. Basically what it boils down to is if the number has a fraction in it, are you able to divide with it still in fraction form? First of all, I want to take a look at what it actually means when you're dividing and when you're dividing by a fraction. So it's really hard for us sometimes to understand that division and multiplication can work synonymously. So if you take a look at 4 divided by 2, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 4 pieces. I'm going to use my sketcher here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So now if I'm taking these 4 pieces and I'm dividing them by 2, what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I want to take 4 and put it into groups of 2. That's what dividing by 2 means. So if I put it into groups of 2, there's 2, and there's 2. So I know 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. It gives me 2 groups. Now a lot of times what students tell me is that 4 divided by half is the same thing as saying 4 divided by 2. It's not, right? So what you have to understand is this number, so the divisor, the number that's doing the dividing, is telling you how many pieces go in a group. Okay, so in this case, 2 whole pieces go into a group. In this case, a half of a piece goes into a group. So let's take a look at what that means. So if I have my 4 pieces, so here's 1, and actually to make this a little bit easier, we're just going to go ahead and copy and paste. All right, so here's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I will make them a little bit larger. There we go. All right, so now before we said 4 divided by 2 gave us 2. In this case, what we're doing, there we go, is we're saying that half of a piece goes into each group. So now what I have to do is I have to take each of those pieces and I have to split each piece in half. So here's 1 group, 2 groups, because you're dividing it into groups of half. So here's half of a piece, and let's make that a little bit better of a circle there. So there's half of a piece. Here's another half of a piece. So now, since we're taking each of these and splitting them in half, so here I've already got 2, and I have a lot more pieces to go. So here's 3 groups, 4 groups, because 1 half of a piece makes a whole group. So since a half of a piece makes a whole group, I'm coming up with a lot more groups here. And what color haven't I used? Orange. So in looking at this, I have now created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So by taking 4 and putting it into groups of 1/2, so put into groups of 1/2. By doing that, I found that 4 divided by 1/2 actually gives me 8. So my number actually got bigger. And the reason my number got bigger is because the size of the pieces that make up a group got smaller. So here, 2 whole pieces made 1 group. Whereas here, a half of a piece makes one group. Well, I have more halves than I do wholes. So that's why my number is getting bigger, because my pieces, the size of my pieces to make a group, are getting smaller. So what about 3 divided by 2/3? So again, if you want to, take an opportunity to try to draw this on your own and look at what's happening. You're taking 3 whole pieces and putting them into groups of 2/3. Right? If you're still a little confused, continue to follow along with me. So we have 1, 2, 3. I'm doing my best to make them the same size, so bear with me. And then now I'm putting them into groups of 2/3. So that tells me my pieces have to be thirds, because I have to be able to put them into groups of 2/3. So I'm going to erase that because that was a bad line. So here's 1, 2, 3. So each of my pieces has to be split into thirds. Now, to make a whole group, it's not 1/3, so this isn't a whole group. This creates a whole group because I need 2/3. So here's an entire group. Now this is where it gets tricky. 1/3, 2/3. These make up a whole group. So now I have 2 groups. And then 1, 2. That makes another group. That makes another group. Now look at here. In this last piece, now here's where we get even trickier. Whoops, that's supposed to be green. Do I have enough here to make a full group? In this case, the answer is no. I have 1 out of the 2 pieces that I need. So even though this is 1/3, that doesn't count as 1/3 right now. What that means is I have 1 out of the 2 pieces that I need to make a whole group. 1/3 is the size of my piece. So in this case, I've created 1, 2, 3, 4 whole groups. And then I had 1 piece left over out of the, again, 1, 2 pieces that make a whole group. So 3 divided by 2/3 gives me 4 1/2. Again, this is sometimes a little complicated to follow, but if you really break it down into this is, so the denominator tells me the size of my pieces, so each piece is 1/3, and the numerator is telling me how many I need to make a group. So in this case, it's a little bit backwards. So I need to put 2 pieces that are each worth 1/3 into a group to make a whole group. So I was able to make 4 whole groups with 1 piece out of the 2 that I need, which tells me I have 1 piece out of 2, which is half of what I need. So now that we get kind of understand how this is working and what's going on, we're going to talk about how to do it mathematically. So we're going to talk about the process. Again, you do need to understand this piece of it, and we are going to be going over this more and using it, but we also need to be able to just actually physically do the problem. So first of all, you need to go into your vocabulary notebook because we are going to talk about reciprocals. Reciprocals are the values that you can multiply a fraction by to get a product of 1. So we kind of talked about this before when we were talking about, when we were working with equivalent fractions a little bit. So what's happening here is we're saying, okay, I have 1/4. We want to know what times 1/4 will give me 1. So what that means is I need something times 1/4 that is going to give me essentially 1/1. But that's not always going to be the case. You have to remember that 1 can be 4/4. 1 can also be 3/3. So as long as your top and your bottom, your numerator and your denominator are equal, it is going to be equal to 1. In this case, since our denominator is 4, I want something that is going to give me 4/4. Well, I know that 4 times 1 gives me 4, so 1 would be my denominator, and I know 1 times 4 gives me 4, so that would be my numerator. So in this case, if I take 1/4 times 4 over 1, it gives me 4 over 4. So the reciprocal of 1/4 is 4 over 1. On that same token, so we have 2/3, and I want it to give me something that is equal to 1 over 1. Well, 2 and 3 can both multiply to 6. So we want it to get to 6 over 6. Well, I know that 3 times 2 gives me 6, and I know that 2 times 3 gives me 6. So 3/2 is the reciprocal of 2/3. Notice, all you're doing is you're flipping your fraction. So the reciprocal literally is telling you just flip your fraction. That's what you're looking for. However, you need to understand to check your work. So let's say you said, oh, the reciprocal of 2/4 is 4/3. Well, let's multiply that and take a look. It doesn't work, so that can't be the reciprocal. So now you know, oops, I made a mistake. That 3 should have actually been a 2. Okay, so again, the reciprocal is telling you to flip your fraction. And this is really important. All right, so we're going to take a look at this and look at what is the reciprocal of each of these numbers. Well, 7/8 is simple. We know we just flip it. So the reciprocal of 7/8 is 8/7. Whole numbers are a little different. You have 8 over 1. When it's a whole number, you always put it over 1. So the reciprocal then, in this case, isn't 8 over 1. The reciprocal is 1/8. Now here, 1 and 2/3. A lot of students like to just tell me it's this. That is incorrect. In order to be the reciprocal, your fraction needs to include all of the pieces. So in order for your fraction to include all of the pieces, you actually have to put the pieces from this whole group back into your fraction. So you have to turn your mixed number into an improper fraction. And I know to do that, I say, okay, I have one group of 3, so 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 extra pieces is 5/3. That's my improper fraction. Now I need the reciprocal. So the reciprocal in this case would be 3/5. Right? These two are probably the trickiest ones for students because they forget that putting it over 1 isn't the reciprocal. It's just turning your whole number into an improper fraction. And that you can't just flip the fraction, you need it to actually be improper if it's a mixed number, then flipping your fraction. All right, so steps for dividing fractions. When you're dividing with fractions, the first thing that you need to do, there we go, is find the reciprocal of the divisor, the second fraction. Please put in here that that number is the divisor. Okay, it's the second fraction. And I shouldn't even say fraction because sometimes you might be dividing by a whole number. So you would have to find the reciprocal of the whole number as well. Okay, so for me, this means that 3/7 now turns into 7/3. Now, you don't have to write this out the entire time, but for what we're doing right now, write it out. The second step, you actually multiply. So now, instead of doing 1/8 divided by 3/7, we're actually doing 1/8 times 7/3. In doing that, I find that I get 7/24. And then my last step would be to either simplify or convert. Okay, so simplify or convert. If your answer is an improper fraction, you need to convert it to a mixed number. In this case, it can't be simplified, and it's proper, so my answer is 7/4. So here's why this works. So let's look back at the example of 4 divided by 2. 4 divided by 2 gave us 2. Well, if you look at this, this is actually 4 divided by 2 over 1. All right, so when I do that, actually this is a bad example. Let's say I'm taking 4 times 2. I know 4 times 2 gives me 8. Well, on the flip side of the coin, before we said that 4 divided by 1/2, we also know that that gave us 8. Okay, because what's happening here is you're saying, okay, I'm taking 4 and I'm doubling the amount of pieces that I have to get 8 pieces. Well, that's exactly what we did here when we divided by half. Because what we did was we took those 4, so we took every one piece, and every one piece became worth 2. So I actually doubled the amount of pieces that I had, which is what this is telling me as well. So we'll get there in terms of understanding all those pieces. But now we have 2/5 divided by 1/8. If you feel like you're ready to, I want you to pause and try it on your own and come back and check your work. So again, first I have to find the reciprocal of the divisor. So my reciprocal, so my first fraction stays the same, my dividend stays the same. My reciprocal of 1/8 is 8 over 1. And I'm actually then going to multiply. I can't change it to multiplication until I find the reciprocal. And then I multiply straight across and I get 16/5. However, that's improper, so I have to convert that to a mixed number. So I know 5 goes into 16 3 times. Again, you can set it up as long division. 5 goes into 16 3 times, so that's my whole number. That uses up 15 pieces. I have 1 piece left over out of the 5 that I need to make a whole group. So my answer is 3 1/5. Now let's take a look at dividing with mixed numbers. First step, change my mixed numbers to improper fractions. That was also the first step when we multiplied, because remember, you have to include all of the pieces. So if you don't put this whole number back into the pieces, okay, if you don't turn your whole pizza back into slices, you're not going to chop it up correctly. I know that seems like an odd way to say it, but that's actually what's happening. So if you're not taking that whole and actually putting it in and making all your pieces the same size, it's not going to work. So instead of having it, you can't do it like this and then divide it out. That doesn't work. You actually have to have it like this, so that way your pieces are all the same size. And excuse my crappy drawings. I try my best to make them all the same size. So in this case, we have 1 1/3, which we know turns into 4/3. And we have 2 1/2, which we know turns into 5/2. So now my second step is actually going to be to find the reciprocal of the divisor yet again. Okay, so it's the same idea. You still have to find the reciprocal of that divisor. Let me move these out of the way here. There we go. So now I have to find the reciprocal of the divisor, which in this case we know we have to use that improper fraction, so the reciprocal is 2/5. Now that I've done that, I can go to step 3, which is to multiply. So again, my steps are the same. The only thing that changes is changing it to improper fractions. So now I have 4/3 times 2/5. Oops, see, sometimes we write it down incorrectly, so we have to slow down and check. So times 2/5, because that's the reciprocal, and I get 8/15. And again, that last step would be to simplify or convert. Okay, and it's important to understand that simplifying and converting are not the same thing. Simplifying means you're turning your numbers into the smallest that they can be. Converting is when you're changing it from a mixed number to an improper fraction or a whole number. Okay, and simplifying in this case, 8/15 is as simple as it gets. Simplify or convert. So my answer is 8/15. All right, so here's another opportunity for you to try it on your own or to work through it with me. And then just make sure you come back and check that work. So here we have to first convert it to an improper fraction. So I get 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. So I have 3 halves. And 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3 is 7, so 7/4. Okay, so step 1 is done. Step 2, where I have to find the reciprocal. So the reciprocal in this case is 4/7, so that's what I'm actually going to use. And then 3 tells me that I can multiply. Right? So multiply. So 3 times 4 is 12. 2 times 7 is 14. And then step 4 is your simplify or convert. In this case, we can simplify. We can divide both of them by 2. So 12/14 divided by 2/2 gives us 6/7. Right, and this is where that piece comes in, where dividing by 2/2 makes a big difference, because 12/14 divided by 2/2 is way different than dividing it by 1. Okay, because here it would end up being 12/14 times 1/2. So now all of a sudden you've got 12/28. Whereas here, here, this would be 12/14 times still 2/2, which would be 24/28, which would still simplify to 6/7. So again, this does make a huge difference when you write it down incorrectly. For those of you that are ready for it, to make that simplification easier and faster, what you can do is, if you have 3 halves and you're multiplying by 4/7, you can do your cross simplification. So 2 and 4 are both divisible by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then when I multiply straight across, I get 3 times 2 is 6. And 1 times 7 is 7. So I can simplify when I multiply. Alright, so you have a couple of problems here that I would like you to try on your own. Again, we're just working through the process of how to multiply. So make sure you have enough space to show your work. And as always, if you have any questions, be sure to write them down or email me so that way we can go over them in class.